It started innocuously enough, like any other morning. I was sipping my coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through emails on my phone, while my wife, Julie, bustled around. She was humming a tune, her voice as sweet as it had been since we met. It was hard to believe that a decade had passed since our wedding day. Life hadn't been without its challenges. Last year's accident had been the hardest. It left me in a coma for nearly 3 weeks, a time I barely remember beyond the hospital lights and muted voices. As I slowly came to, Julie had been a pillar of strength, or so I thought. But something had changed since my recovery. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what, but Julie seemed distant. Our laughter wasn't as frequent, and the warmth in her eyes flickered less often. I chalked it up to the stress of nearly losing me. After all, it had been a traumatic time for us both. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The cracks in our relationship widened in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. She took more time away from home, meeting friends, she said. She smiled at her phone more often than at me, quickly tucking it away if I glanced her way. I told myself it was paranoia, that the accident had left me overly sensitive. It was during one of those quiet mornings that the dagger plunged. We were halfway through breakfast when she set her coffee mug down with a hollow clink and looked at me. "Sam," she started, her tone measured, almost clinical, "I've been meaning to tell you something." The air grew heavier. I could feel the shift, like the seconds before a storm. "I've been trying to find the right way to say this," she hesitated, then shrugged, her expression hardening. "But there isn't one. You remember last year? Your accident and the coma?" My heart tightened. "Of course," I said cautiously. She stared straight at me, her lips curving into a smirk that seemed so out of place on the face I'd loved for years. "That was us," she said. "Me and Greg. We needed that time. We've been waiting for an opportunity and, well, your accident gave us just that." The words didn't register at first. I blinked, unsure if I'd misheard. "Wait, what are you saying?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Her smirk deepened. "While you were lying there unconscious, Greg and I had our fun. Wild nights, you might call them. We even threw a party in your hospital room once. Funny, huh? Your family cried by your bedside, but the moment they walked out, they laughed. They laughed and drank and celebrated life while you just lay there." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The woman in front of me felt like a stranger. "And the kids," she continued, her voice almost conversational. "They adore Greg. You think they prefer you? No, Sam, they like him more. Hell, they don't even like you. You're just there." Her words felt like a bludgeon, each one knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the cruelty of her delivery. It was calculated, deliberate, designed to hurt. And it worked. As she stood to refill her coffee, I remained rooted to my chair, my mind spinning. I had to know why she was telling me now. What was the purpose of this assault? But the words refused to come. Instead, I sat there, staring into the dregs of my coffee, wondering how everything I'd believed in could shatter in an instant. What had I done to deserve this? And how long had the life I thought I was living been a lie? Her voice snapped me out of my daze. "Oh, don't look so shocked, Sam. You should have seen this coming." She turned back to the counter, humming that tune again, as though she hadn't just destroyed everything I knew. In that moment, I realized I had to figure out the truth, every sordid detail of what had happened while I lay in that hospital bed. And then, somehow, I'd have to find a way to survive what came next. I sat there in stunned silence as Julie's cruel words echoed in my mind, slicing through memories I once held dear. How had it come to this? This wasn't the woman I married. Or maybe she was, and I was just too blind to see it. I needed to step away, to think, but my body felt leaden. Instead, my mind drifted back to when we first met. I had just turned 24, fresh out of college with a degree in mechanical engineering. I was working my first job at a manufacturing plant in the Midwest, clocking long hours but loving the challenge. Julie walked into my life like a summer breeze at a friend's barbecue, wearing a sundress and a smile that could have lit up the entire county. She was vibrant, witty, and had this infectious energy that made everyone around her feel alive. We clicked instantly. She worked in marketing, always full of stories about the clients she managed and the campaigns she helped create. I was the quieter one, steady, practical, and maybe a little too serious. She said she liked that about me, that I kept her grounded. I liked how she made me laugh, how she pushed me out of my comfort zone. Back then, I thought we balanced each other out. We got married 3 years later in a small church ceremony. My family adored her and her parents thought I was good husband material, though they always seemed a little lukewarm toward me. They were big city types. Her dad a retired lawyer, her mum an art gallery owner. Julie grew up in a world of piano lessons and ski trips, while I came from a blue-collar family. My dad was a machinist, my mum a school secretary, and a sex offender. But none of that mattered to me. I loved her. Our life together wasn't perfect, but it was good. I worked hard, moving up the ranks at the plant, while Julie eventually transitioned to freelancing so she could spend more time at home after the kids came along. Our oldest, Mia, is 11 now. She has Julie's sharp wit and my knack for puzzles. Then there's Luke, 8, who has my shy demeanor but lights up like a firework when he's passionate about something, usually dinosaurs. I poured myself into being a good father, making sure I was home for them, bedtime stories, school projects, and every soccer game. If there was one thing I was proud of, it was being a dad. But even as I tried to focus on the good times, Julie's words gnawed at me. The kids don't even like you. Was that true? Were they laughing behind my back too? My stomach churned at the thought. I stood abruptly, the scrape of the chair legs against the tile startling Julie. She turned, her smirk fading for just a moment before she composed herself. What? Can't handle a little honesty? I ignored her and walked upstairs, needing to get out of her presence before I said or did something I'd regret. I stopped in the doorway of Mia's room. It was decorated with posters of constellations and planets, her latest obsession. Her school science fair project on black holes had been the talk of her class last month, and I'd spent hours helping her build the display. Did she hate me? Did she prefer Julie's lover, this Greg? Luke's room was next. His bed was unmade, as usual, and a half-assembled Lego set covered the floor. I'd stepped on more of those bricks than I cared to count, but seeing them now, I couldn't help but smile faintly. Luke and I had spent last Saturday building a model T-Rex together. He'd hugged me afterward, saying, "Thanks, Dad, you're the best." Was all of that a lie? Back downstairs, I found Julie lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of our life. The audacity made my blood boil. "Way now," I demanded, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Why tell me all of this now?" She didn't even look up. "When not? You've been walking around like some clueless saint, thinking we're the perfect family. I thought you deserved to know the truth." "You didn't think I deserved the truth a year ago, or 5 years ago?" My voice rose. "You let me pour everything I had into this family, and now you're throwing it in my face like it's some kind of joke?" She rolled her eyes, finally setting her phone down. "Oh, stop playing the martyr, Sam. You're so predictable. Always the hard-working, self-sacrificing husband. Do you even realize how boring you are? How suffocating?" The words hit harder than I expected. "Boring," I repeated. "Suffocating. I've worked my ass off for this family. I gave you everything." She cut me off with a laugh. "Gave me everything, please. You gave me stability, sure, but stability gets old, Sam. You're the guy who fixes the sink and mows the lawn. Greg's the guy who makes me feel alive." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "And what about the kids? Do you even care what this will do to them?" "Well, don't drag them into this," she snapped. "They'll be fine. Greg's great with them. Honestly, they'll probably be happier with him around instead of you." I stared at her, my mind reeling. She had no remorse. None. She'd not only betrayed me, but she was rewriting our entire life together, as if it was some kind of cruel joke. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way to expose her lies, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The storm inside me hadn't calmed, but I needed answers. As much as I wanted to rage and lash out, there was a gnawing question I couldn't shake. Why? Why had she done this? Why had she turned the life we built into a grotesque mockery of itself? Julie had retreated to the kitchen, sipping another cup of coffee like she hadn't just ripped my world apart. I leaned against the counter, watching her with the kind of calm that comes right before something snaps. "We, Julie?" I finally asked, my voice eerily steady. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Wait, what?" "Wait, Greg, why betray me, the kids, everything?" Julie sighed dramatically, setting her mug down with a clink. "You really want to know?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Fine, I'll tell you." I braced myself. "It's because you're too easy, Sam. Predictable, safe, and after a while, safe gets dull." She smirked, as if her confession should make sense to me. "Greg is exciting. He's spontaneous, fun. He doesn't take life so seriously. With you, it's always schedules and responsibilities and making sure the bills are paid. Do you know what that's like, living with someone who treats life like it's a checklist?" I stared at her, barely believing what I was hearing. "You're blaming me for being responsible, for making sure our family has a roof over its head and food on the table?" She shrugged. "It's more than that. Greg makes me feel alive in a way you never did. He knows how to have a good time. He's not afraid to break the rules." "Break the rules?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean like sleeping with another man's wife?" She didn't even flinch. "Yes, exactly. He takes what he wants. Do you have any idea how intoxicating that is?" My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And the kids? Did you ever think about how your good time would affect them?" Julie rolled her eyes. "Oh, they're resilient, and honestly, they'll probably be better off. Greg's great with them. He knows how to have fun, something you clearly don't." Her words were venom, each one sinking in deeper. But instead of breaking, I felt something shift inside me, a cold, calculated resolve. That night, after Julie went to bed, I sat in the dark living room thinking. The house was silent save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. If she thought she could humiliate me, tear apart our family, and rewrite history to make herself the victim, she had another thing coming. The first thing I did was dig deeper into her relationship with Greg. Using some software I designed during a side gig years ago, I cloned Julie's phone. Every text, every call, every photo. Greg's cocky smile was plastered all over it. They had even taken selfies together in my house, with my kids in the background. The audacity of it made my blood boil, but I kept digging. That's when I found it, a trail of evidence that painted a much darker picture. Greg wasn't just a home wrecker. He was a scam artist. Bank transfers from Julie's account to his, large sums, thousands of dollars over the past year, and it wasn't just money. He'd convinced her to co-sign a loan for a business that didn't exist. She thought she'd found an exciting partner, but what she'd really found was a parasite. The next day, I took action. I met with a lawyer and laid out everything, the affair, the financial deception, the impact on our kids. My lawyer, Ruby, nodded grimly. "This is going to be messy," she said, "but if we play this right, you'll come out on top." The first move was to protect the kids. I filed for emergency custody, citing Julie's reckless financial behavior and neglect. I had proof that she'd left them with Greg while she went off on their little adventures. I also filed a restraining order against Greg, citing his criminal background. Something I'd uncovered during my late night, but I wasn't done. I waited until Julie was out of the house to put my plan into motion. First, I emptied our joint accounts, moving every penny into a separate account in my name. Then, I printed copies of every incriminating text and bank statement I could find. I left them in a neat pile on the dining table, along with a note. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. The final touch was a little gift for Greg. Using my software, I hacked into his social media accounts and scheduled a post to go live the next morning. It was a collage of all the texts and photos between him and Julie, along with a caption that read, "Meet Greg, family man, entrepreneur, and thief." I made sure it was public. The fallout was nuclear. By the time Julie returned home, her phone was blowing up with calls and messages. She stormed into the house, her face pale. "What did you do?" she hissed. I didn't bother hiding my satisfaction. Trust leveled the playing field. She threw her phone onto the table, her hands shaking. "You've ruined everything." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "No, Julia, you ruined everything. I'm just making sure the world knows it." Her mask of confidence cracked for the first time. She looked scared. And that was just the beginning. Julie stood in the center of the living room, her confidence shattered. The smug, self-assured woman I'd been dealing with was gone. Instead, she looked like a trapped animal, her mind racing to figure out a way out of this mess. "You had no right," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. This is malicious. This promise is ill." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, and gave her the coldest stare I could muster. "No, Julie. This is justice. Malicious would be me walking away and letting Greg take you for every penny you've got, leaving you with nothing. But you know what? I might still do that." Her eyes darted to the pile of evidence I'd left on the dining table. The bank statements, the texts, the photos. She picked them up, flipping through them, her breathing quick and shallow. You went through my phone?" "That's rich," I said with a bitter laugh. "You were screwing around behind my back, draining our accounts, lying to our kids, and you're mad that I invaded your privacy. Grow up, Julie." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I could see the gears turning, her mind struggling to find a way to spin this in her favor, but there was no way out, and she knew it. The next morning, the consequences of my actions began to unfold in spectacular fashion. Julie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in from her friends, family, and co-workers. Everyone had seen the posts about Greg. Her reputation, her carefully curated image of a loving wife and mother, was crumbling before her eyes. At first, she tried damage control. She called a few close friends, trying to explain, trying to twist the narrative. "Sam's just overreacting," she told one of them on speakerphone. "He's making a big deal out of nothing. Greg's just a friend." But the friend interrupted, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Julie, you sent him money, you signed a loan with him, and those photos. Come on. Do you think we're all stupid?" Julie slammed the phone down, her face flushed with frustration. She glared at me like I was the devil himself, but I just smirked. "People aren't buying your lies, huh?" By midday, Greg was in just as much trouble. His phone, too, had blown up with calls and messages. But unlike Julie, he had much more to lose. One of the messages came from his probation officer. Turns out he'd violated the terms of his release by engaging in financial fraud. I'd made sure the authorities received a little anonymous tip about his activities. When Julie finally tried to call him, the line went straight to voicemail. "He's not answering," she muttered, pacing the living room. "Maybe he's busy explaining himself to the cops," I said dryly, not bothering to hide my satisfaction. She whipped around to face me, her expression a mixture of fury and panic. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I stood, meeting her glare head-on. "You bet I am. Do you have any idea what it's like to be lied to, humiliated, and betrayed by the person you trusted most? Did you think I'd just sit back and let you walk away without consequences?" That night, the final domino fell. I was upstairs in the kids' rooms, helping Luke organize his Legos and listening to Mia excitedly talk about a new astronomy book she had gotten from school. For a moment, the chaos with Julie and Greg faded into the background, and I remembered why I was doing all this, why I couldn't let her selfishness destroy everything. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Julie opened it, and I heard Greg's voice, low and urgent. "What the hell, Julie?" he snapped. "Everything's falling apart because of you." Me? Julie hissed back. This is Sam's fault. He's the one who... Don't blame him, Greg cut her off. You're the one who dragged me into this mess. Do you have any idea how much trouble I'm in? The cops are looking for me. There was a pause and then his voice dropped even lower, almost a growl. You're on your own, Julie. I can't deal with this. I stood at the top of the stairs watching as Greg stormed out the door, leaving Julie standing there, stunned. She turned back. Toward the living room, her expression was vacant. For the first time since this all started, Julie looked truly defeated. I descended the stairs slowly, my footsteps echoing in the now silent house. When I reached the bottom, she looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Sam, I'm sorry, I messed up. I wasn't thinking. Save it, I said, my voice cold and final. You're only sorry because you got caught. Her lips trembled, but I didn't care anymore. You didn't just hurt me, Julie. You hurt the kids. You destroyed everything we built. And for what? A guy who walked out the second things got tough. She didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The next week was a whirlwind. My lawyer expedited the divorce proceedings, and I made sure the custody arrangement was airtight. Julie tried to fight back, but her reputation, finances, and support system were in tatters. She didn't stand a chance. By the time the dust settled, I had full custody of the kids, the house, and the satisfaction of knowing I hadn't let her destroy me. As for Julie, she moved out, taking what little dignity she had left. Greg? Last I heard, he was facing multiple fraud charges. The kids and I began to rebuild, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but every step forward felt like a victory. One thing was certain, we were better off without her. The house was quiet in the weeks after Julie left. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but a heavy, suffocating silence that reminded me of everything we'd lost. The kids were trying to adjust, though they didn't fully understand why their mum wasn't around as much anymore. I'd done my best to shield them from the uglier details, but I knew they could sense the tension. Mia, being older, asked more questions. Dad, is Mum coming back? She said one night as I tucked her in. Her voice was soft, almost afraid of the answer. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. Mum's going to be living somewhere else now, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She just made some choices that weren't good for our family. Mia stared at me for a long moment before nodding. I guess that makes sense, she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Luke, on the other hand, was quieter than usual. He didn't ask as many questions, but he clung to me more, wanting to sit next to me during dinner or play Legos together late into the night. It broke my heart, but I made a promise to myself. I'd be there for them no matter what. I wouldn't let Julie's betrayal define their lives or mine. The devastation I felt at being dismissed for good made me believe my heart might be held. Someday, I would manage to curb my emotions and act instead doctrine rather than feelings. At the moment, the fallout for Julie was as brutal as I'd anticipated. Greg had gone into hiding after being charged with fraud, leaving her to face the wreckage of their relationship alone. She tried to save face, but the damage was done. Friends who once idolized her as the perfect wife and mother now avoided her. Even her own parents, who had always been lukewarm toward me, called to apologize for her behavior. We're ashamed, Sam, her father admitted over the phone one evening. She's made a mess of everything. You and the kids deserved better. It was a bittersweet moment. Their words didn't fix anything, but at least they acknowledged the injustice of it all. Months passed, and slowly life began to regain some sense of normalcy. The kids adjusted to our new routine, and I found myself rediscovering parts of me that had been buried under the weight of Julie's betrayal. I threw myself into being the best dad I could be, helping Mia with her science projects, building an elaborate Lego city with Luke, and making Saturday night movie marathons a new family tradition. The first Christmas without Julie was tough. The kids asked if she'd be there, and I had to explain that she'd already made plans. It stung more than I expected, but we made the best of it. I baked cookies, badly, wrap presents, and even let the kids decorate the tree however they wanted. By the end of the night, the living room looked like a glitter explosion, but their laughter made it all worth it. And it saved the tree. By the end of the night, we had a shady place over the tree and went to bed. One evening, months later, Julie showed up, unannounced. She stood on the porch, looking thinner, her once pristine appearance replaced by a frazzled, almost desperate energy. "I just want to talk," she said, her voice wavering. Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she'd dropped her bombshell months earlier, but this time her confidence was gone. "I messed up, Sam," she began, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't realize how good I had it until I lost it. Her voice broke. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to be part of the kids' lives again." I stared at her. A part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of the pain she'd caused. But I was tired of anger. It had consumed me for months, and I didn't want it to have power over me anymore. "The kids deserve to have both parents in their lives," I said finally. "But on my terms. I'll decide when and how you see them. You don't get to waltz back in and act like nothing happened." She nodded, looking relieved. "Thank you, Sam. That's more than I deserve." Julie started seeing the kids again, slowly rebuilding a relationship with them. I made sure to supervise every interaction at first, setting clear boundaries. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As for me, I started focusing on the future. I found a therapist to help me work through the lingering anger and betrayal, and I began spending more time with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Little by little, I began to feel like myself again. Not the broken man Julie had left, but someone stronger, wiser. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I stumbled across an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of happier times, family vacations, birthdays, moments when life felt whole. I closed the album and set it aside. Those memories would always be part of my story, but they didn't define me anymore. By the end of that year, I realized something profound. I'd survived. Julie's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it hadn't. And in the process, I'd found something far more valuable than revenge or validation. I'd found myself, and that was worth everything.